Okay, so let's continue talking about solutions. So a solution has two parts, and they're called the solvent and the solute. So they all have that sol beginning, S-O-L. A solution is made up of a solvent and a solute. And so the solvent is what we would call the major component. Okay, so we have typically two components, but it can be more. There can be multiple solutes, but um, the solvent is the major component. The solute is the minor component. Now, what does that mean? That means the major component is the one that you have the most of. Okay, so then solute would be the one you have the least of. So we say that the solute dissolves in the solvent. Right? Oftentimes the solvent would be like water, but it could be other things. Um, and so the solute is the thing that does the dissolving because it's like the one that you have the least of, surrounded by solvent particles. Here's an example. Here in this tray, or the dish, is copper sulfate. It's a solid, it's a salt, and when you put it into water, it's a solute. Water would be the solvent. And so these types of, if water is the solvent, it's called an aqueous solution. So as an example of, and it's often named by the solute. So copper 2 sulfate would be dissolved into water, but it'd be called a solution of copper 2 sulfate. Just kind of naming there. Now water is not always the solvent. In example A here, we have a teaspoon of sugar added to a beaker of water. So in this case, sugar is the solute and water is the solvent, and so it's a aqueous solution. But in picture B, water is the minor component added to sugar, so sugar is the solvent. This forms taffy, and this very happy fellow here making it. Do you think he takes some home with him every night? I would if I worked at a taffy store or a factory. I would not be a good taffy worker. I would be homesick and overweight all the time because I love taffy. But anyway, water can act as the solute or the solvent, or anything can really. Um, it's just think about which one is there more of. Okay, and it doesn't have to just be a liquid. As you can see, sugar can be the solvent, and sugar is a solid. So we can have all sorts of solutions, um, like a gaseous solution would be a mixture of two gases, but it's still technically a solution because they're small particles, less than a nanometer in size. And an example would be air, which would be nitrogen as the solvent. We found that out last chapter. It's like 78% nitrogen, with other gases like oxygen as solutes. We could also have liquid solutions where we have liquid as the solvent, but then each of the different types of gas, liquid, solid could be dissolved into it, right? And so like soda water is CO2 dissolved into water. Vodka is an example of ethanol dissolved in water. Seawater would have salt dissolved in liquid. By the way, I don't think I have this on another slide later, but vodka is 40% ethanol by volume, which means it's 60% water. So yeah, ethanol is the solvent, solute, water is the solvent. But there's this there's this nasty little thing out there called Everclear, and it is 95% ethanol, 5% water, which is crazy. It's not something that is actually supposed to be drank. It's supposed to be mixed. But anyway, in this case, ethanol is the solvent, right? So it's the major component. Water is not always the solvent. Um, by the way, so vodka it is 80 proof, and Everclear is 190 proof, and then the percent alcohol is half that number, so that's why it's 40% and 95%. Um, the other type of solution would be solid, solid. Brass, other alloys are good examples of that. So I covered up the question here, but what determines the phase of the solution? The solution phase is based on the solvent phase. And that makes sense too, because that's the major component. So most of the solution is made up of that. And so whatever that is, that's kind of how we define the solution. So here's a unique uh, type of mixture is blood. I'm sure you know a lot about blood by now, but the different types of particles in blood actually allow it to be classified as a solution, a colloid, and a suspension. So there is definitely a lot going on in there. So there's suspended particles like blood cells, and, red, white, and platelets. They're big, right? They're larger than micrometer, and they are heterogeneous. You may be able to even see them. You can see them with a microscope. There are colloidal particles that are kind of the intermediate phase that give it a color and cloudiness, and plasma proteins and other things. And definitely there are solutes, small molecules dissolved, electrolytes, gases, uh, glucose, things like that. So you have a little bit of everything in there. Okay, I have some questions for you. Just to kind of check here. So remember, I have across the top here, remember uh, what a pure substance and a mixture are. And then remember that those can be broken down further. A pure substance can be an element or a compound, and a mixture can be homogeneous or heterogeneous. So classify each type of matter here in this question as first, is it a pure substance or a mixture? And then if it's a pure substance, is it an element or a compound? And if it's a mixture, is it homogeneous or heterogeneous? So since uh, you're watching this on your own time, you can pause it and answer each question. And here are the results. Okay, there are more questions like this at the end of the section, but this is actually the end of the section, so let's move on to the next section, and we'll look at solutions in more detail, looking at what it means to dissolve. All right.